All right, team. So we're looking at the idea that wolves have been absent from Yellowstone for almost 70 years. And that in 95, they were brought back in, and over the first 3 years, 41 wolves were reintroduced from numerous packs up in Canada. Unsurprisingly to biologists, their numbers grew, despite what ranchers and hunters were fearing, that they get out of control, there'd be too many of them. Biologists knew that natural factors would keep them in check. And sure enough, we had a parvovirus outbreak that brought them back into line. They started to rebound. Mange got in there due to a genetic diversity within the wolves. Some did well, some didn't. But again, it's shaken out. We've got about a little over 100 wolves and about a dozen packs spread throughout the park, mostly in the north in the Lamar Valley, where there is the abundance of prey. And so we know what happened along the river sides, to the trees, to the vegetation, to the stream sides, without the wolves there. Hopefully you now understand the connection between wolves and vegetation and the river. What I want to look at now is, we got the wolves back in the park. What did we see unfold once we restored a keystone species, once we put back the apex predator that we had removed from the park, from the greater Yellowstone ecosystem? So let's check this out. This little graphic, we'll come back, we'll look at it piece by piece. Not unsurprisingly, there's a connection here between wolves and elk. Elk is the preferred prey animal for wolves, and that's what they mainly sustain themselves on. So wolves were starting to hunt those elk out of the gate. They had been fed roadkill elk while they were in their large enclosures. They knew what they were going for. It's what they hunted up in Canada as well, predominantly. And they knew what they were going for, and they started chasing them. And the easier they were to find, the easier they were to get. And the elk started to dwindle in numbers, not rapidly, but, hey, wow, are we taking out the strong and the fit and the big and the bulky? No, we're taking out the weak and the old and the sick. And so the numbers of elk went down a little bit, all right? And there's a secondary to that right here, which is, when a wolf makes a kill, when a single wolf doesn't make a kill, when the pack makes a kill, they will gorge themselves on that meat. They can eat 20, 25 pounds of raw meat, fill their bellies, and they just kind of laze around going, wow, that's a lot to eat. And while they're lazing around in the near distance, somebody else may roll in to try to have a snack. That could be a grizzly bear, a black bear. And now the wolves, we know apex predators don't like to mix it up too much, but the wolves might say, hey, get out of here. You're going to eat a bunch of our food. And they may scrap it up with a grizzly bear and try to chase it off. Grizzly bear wins. Grizzly bear is much bigger and stronger. It is not quite as fast, but the wolves are not going to make a dent on a determined grizzly bear. The grizzly bear ain't all that hungry. Maybe they can chase it off because it just doesn't want the nuisance. But the grizzly bear will sit and eat. But along with that, we're also going to have things like ravens and bald eagles coming to feast. And they get to make a meal of this as well. So all of a sudden, having these wolf kills on the river valley bottoms became food for other animals. And all of a sudden, bears weren't sustaining themselves as much on fish and berries and grubs and things. They had the occasional big meat meal that they could pack. And the number of bears increased in Yellowstone. The ravens and the bald eagles all of a sudden had other meals they could enjoy to round out their diet. All right, so that makes sense too. We have a fewer elk, and now the elk are also feeding these secondary creatures in there. But wait, there's more. When we diminish some of the elk herd, that has downstream effects, pardon the pun, on the aquatic creatures there too. The elk were easy prey when they were running along an unvegetated river bottom, and so they got chased away to the forest, to the uplands. Not that the wolves still weren't hunting them there, but the elk quickly figured out, don't hide in plain sight. That's not going to work for you. You need more cover. You need to be safer than that. And so when the elk were not over-browsing the riverside, when those trees were not being nubbled down every time they shot up a shoot to create a new tree, all of a sudden there became plenty of food for the beaver. And we went in quick succession from one family of beavers in the Lamar Valley to over a dozen in just a year or two, because all of a sudden there was plenty of space. There was plenty of, or had been space. Now there was plenty of food for these creatures to dine on. And what do these beavers do with sticks besides eat the bark? They are going to build a dam. And behind that dam, we get a pond backing up. And that has, again, ripple effects. All of a sudden, holding the stable riverside in with more vegetation along this riverbank, not silting in. These fish have a place to raise their young. They may prefer some fast-moving water with high oxygen, but their young are going to need maybe some side eddies, and they're going to find those in those ponds. You're also going to have a place for the birds to catch the bugs that are going to hatch out of this pond. The willow flycatchers to live in those willow trees and the cottonwoods and the aspens and the poplars along the riverbanks. And the pond's also going to be a place where the amphibians can lay their eggs. And all of this is a much more rich tapestry in the biodiversity in Yellowstone National Park. Right? We had a boom, we had an increase. And it wasn't just it was an increase of what had been an absence in the park. Now with the habitat being rehabilitated due to the presence of the wolves, the other creatures came back too. But wait, there's more. We know that the wolf ate the elk and that the elk provided food for other creatures. All right? We also know that when the elk was removed, that gave space for other creatures to have a home, to build a home, to use the food that the elk were not using now that they had been pushed away from the riversides. But there's another connection here I want to make for you, and that is this one. Wolf, coyote, they are both dogs. They are both canines. And we have gone over the fact that no two species can occupy the same niche. Just like we talked about the fact that, hey, little woodpecker, peck away on that tree, no problem. But if I have another species of woodpecker that comes in, poof, there's competition, and we're going to have resource partitioning. And that was what had happened prior to the elimination of the wolves. It is not that wolves hunt coyotes per se to make them a meal out of them, but the wolves do not tolerate coyotes in their territory and will attack them and kill them if they are so provoked. All right, I'll link a short video for you for those of you brave enough to watch what happens. But what happened is a really cool, I just love the term. When the coyotes became an apex predator because the wolves were gone, there were downstream effects on everything below them. The pronghorn, the voles, the fox, and let's look at that. It is a term called mesopredator release. You have released that middle predator. The coyote isn't really an apex predator. But when the wolf, who was keeping them in check, was removed, they suddenly, poof, got bumped up to a more boss-like position. Without being, hey, they now had more space, more resource, more food to roam around, territory to roam around and food to gather out of that territory, their numbers went up. All right, and so you have your mesopredator. In this case, it was the coyote, but the mesopredator can now go after the voles and the rats and the small things and really put a dent in them where they were not being preyed so heavily upon. The foxes also, with the increase in the coyote population, increased in numbers. All right, and when we brought back the wolf, that coyote number decreased because the coyotes were not tolerated by the wolves. Whereas the bear might come in and say, hey, I like your kill. You guys are done or not. I'm going to eat now. And the bear can hold its own at 3, 4, 5 times. I don't know what it is, 5 times a wolf's size. It's got a paw the size of a dinner plate with 3-inch claws at the end of that. And the wolf is tolerant of the ravens and the eagles because whatever. But the coyote, that is a direct competitor. It is, again, also a canine. and they will chase it off, and frequently they will make a point of it when they chase it off and kill that coyote. So coyotes sort of know better. They may just skirt the distance, and hey, wolves here, I'm gonna find another little niche that I can do. And again, we looked at them having a temporal, a time-wise. Coyotes hunting at a different time of day than the wolves, even if they're hunting the same prey. But the coyotes learn to leave alone the wolf kill that these others might be using as a resource. All right. So that kind of wraps it up, these big ripple effects. I'm going to also I will link the video for what happens when coyote shows up on wolf kill, but spoiler alert, it's one of those nature things where I'm going to tell you right now, wolves catch and kill coyote. If you don't want to watch it, don't watch it, but if you want to see, you can. And then there's going to be another short little video that kind of highlights, kind of recaps everything. And the only thing that you need to pay attention to in that is the British narrator misidentifies elk as deer. Other than that, it is a lovely little recap of everything we've just talked about. So there you are, team. That is our recap on what happens in a large ecosystem when you take away an apex predator, a keystone species, and what happens to the biodiversity. And then when you reinstall that keystone species, that apex predator, what benefits do we see rippling through that ecosystem again as the biodiversity increases? All right. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed.